listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. The search for accused police killer Dezi Freeman has entered its 10th day, and while he's been called to hand himself in, just how likely is it that he will?
Even though he may be a right-wing extremist, that doesn't necessarily mean, and I've seen it myself, that over time, being exposed to the cold, and if he's running out of water and food and lack of sleep, that doesn't mean that he's not pliable to surrender.
That chat with a criminologist and former hostage negotiator about what's going on behind the scenes of this mammoth search in Victoria's northeast is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Helen Smith. It's Thursday, the 4th of September.
Hey Chris, and to you listening. We're starting in China today, where former Foreign Affairs Minister and New South Wales Premier Bob Carr has defended his visit to the country during its largest ever military parade, amid mounting public backlash. Carr, as well as former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews, were both invited to attend the spectacle in Beijing, marking 80 years since Japan's defeat in World War II.
Speaking with the ABC last night, Carr says he personally wouldn't have posed for a group photo alongside North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin like Dan Andrews did, which, if you haven't seen the pic, head to the Briefing podcast on Instagram, and that he didn't attend the parade, rather was having peace and security talks with European and Southeast Asian diplomats.
Do you think that I was excited by the idea of watching weapons from a stand? I wasn't. I came here because the ambassador promised to deliver meetings with Chinese think tanks where I could talk about the problems of peace and war.
And look, if you want to know more about this parade and even why someone like Dan Andrews, who since leaving government has been working as a private consultant, was there, pop back to yesterday's episode. But look, something that caught my attention, Chris, and the rest of the world was this moment that was caught on a live stream. So I know that's hard to hear, but that's Chinese President Xi Jinping and Putin walking alongside Kim Jong-un discussing advances in medicine that could help people live longer. They were talking about how 70 used to be old, but nowadays an organ transplant could help slow aging and maybe, just maybe, means someone could live forever. And just for context, Xi has been in power for 13 years, Putin for 25, and neither have expressed any intention of stepping down.
Back home now, Australian taxpayers could be forking out around $2.5 billion to deport 354 former detainees to Nauru. Speaking at a Senate committee hearing last night, officials from the Department of Home Affairs confirmed that the total cost of resettling the non-citizens to the Pacific Island nation would be $408 million up front and $70 million a year for the next 30 years.
The non-citizens being resettled are those belonging to the NZYQ cohort, a group of former detainees who were released into the community in 2023 after the High Court ruled indefinite immigration detention was illegal. Some who have gone on to reoffend. Now, this is something that we looked into yesterday morning with Green Senator David Shoebridge, and if you want to learn more, hop back and listen. But for context, when we break down the total cost, that actually translates to about $7 million per person being deported. A huge price tag that we want to know if you think is justified.
Yeah, we'll pop a prompt up in our broadcast channel at The Briefing Podcast on Instagram. But look, an argument that David Shoebridge made is that, you know, if these people are going on to reoffend in our community and that these people are criminals, they should be dealt with in our justice system. Now, obviously, the option of locking them up is something that we can't do. That's a High Court ruling that the government just can't override. But just for a little bit of context here, when we're talking about costs, the average cost of jailing an adult in Australia a year is around $150,000. So over 30 years, that translates to $4.5 million, which is a lot lower than that $7 million price tag that we found out last night. So there's a little bit of food for thought, but definitely hop into our broadcast channel. We want to hear from you on this one.
Tens of thousands of older Australians waiting for at-home care will now be able to access support after the government fast-tracked the delivery of 20,000 packages. The Albanese government had initially pushed back against the move to bring forward funding. However, just an hour after saying no, caved to pressure from the Coalition, Greens and some independents, including David Pocock in the Senate. It's the government's first Senate showdown in its new term, something we will continue to see as Labor only holds a supermajority in the lower house, not the Senate. But Chris, what exactly are these packages?
Well, these home care packages provide a mix of care and services for older Australians, and they include help with household tasks, aids and equipment like walking frames, home modifications that can make living more accessible, personal care and clinical care such as nursing. So essentially, this is the government's way of making sure that if an older person, an older Australian has a home, that they can live in this home longer without having to go into, a nursing home. Right now, though, the wait lists for these have grown from 87,000 in March to 108,000 in July. And initially, the government had promised 83,000 of these new packages as part of its broader reforms, but following some delays, none were released. And that wait list is just for approved applicants. There are another 121,000 older Australians still waiting to be assessed for help.
For the first time, 4 Chinese car makers have made it into the top 10 list of most purchased brands after Australians took home over 20,000 Chinese-made vehicles last month. The sales of BYD quadrupled compared with August 2024, coming in 6th on the list this year, overtaking Mitsubishi, while GWM, MG and Chery all outsold Isuzu Ute.
Now, topping the list was Toyota with nearly 21,000 cars sold, followed by Ford with 8,000, then Kia, Mazda and Hyundai, with Elon Musk's Tesla sitting at number 10 with just under 3,000 sales. Now, these numbers show a surge in dominance of Chinese car makers with over 8,000 more vehicles sold in the month of August than they did the previous year. And this all comes as Tesla sales continue to dip with a drop of about 10,000 this year from January to August in comparison to the same time last year. And that is really mirroring, Helen, what we're kind of seeing when it comes to declining Tesla sales recorded in Europe and other parts of the world.
Yeah, and another layer to this story is also the rise of electric and hybrid cars, which many of those Chinese car makers do specialise in. And we actually spoke to an EV expert earlier this year about these Chinese brands taking over the scene from Tesla. And we'll pop a link in our show notes for that one so you can go have a listen.
And have you ever thought you could beat someone at tennis? Well, what about a world number one? That's what Nick Kyrgios thinks about number 1 seed Aryna Sabalenka.
She's the type of player that I think she genuinely thinks she's going to win. She's not going to beat me, bro.
Now, the match that they are set to go head-to-head in is a callback to the historic 1973 showdown between women's tennis icon Billie Jean King and 6-time Grand Slam champion Bobby Riggs, dubbed the Battle of the Sexes.
And Kyrgios and Sabalenka are rep by the same agent, with Kyrgios saying she's awesome, by the way, she's definitely a character, but he thinks his strength will be in his serve, saying our serves, women can't return, and then we can just chip and drop shot. Now, Helen, I know you have strong thoughts and opinions about this one. Let it rip.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go straight to the stats. The facts don't lie. Now, breaking down some of these stats between the two, Sabalenka is a 3-time Grand Slam champion and has made the finals of the Australian and French Opens this year. And she has the biggest serve on the women's tour, and she's currently progressed to the US Open semi-finals. And for Kyrgios, well, he lost his first round match at the Australian Open in straight sets and has not played another Grand Slam match at all this year. His only victory in 2025 was a 3-set win over American player Mackenzie McDonald in the first round of the Miami Open. So he's not having a good year, but he is still a very strong player.
Yes, and he is a very, very exciting player to watch when he does take to the court. But, like in famous Nick Kyrgios style, he says, when I try, I can be a good player. So it'll be very interesting interesting to see what level of effort and care factor he brings to the Battle of the Sexes match, which is set to kick off during the first week of January next year in Hong Kong in the lead up to the Australian Open. Now, look, Helen, I will add some further stats. Kyrgios did make the Wimbledon finals in 2022. He did also win the doubles at Wimbledon with Kokkinakis, the special case. So we are up for a very, very interesting matchup. Whether or not he will dominate Sabalenka is something to be seen.
Look, I'd love to see him try. That would be nice. But, those were a couple of years ago. Sabalenka is in her prime. So, I'll be watching this one for sure. But that brings our headlines to a close for today. Coming up is your deep dive, Chris, into the search for Dezi Freeman with an expert who was actually a hostage negotiator. Have a listen to that coming up next.
You might have seen public appeals in recent days for accused police killer Dezi Freeman to hand himself over to authorities. One came from his wife and another directly from police.
If Dezi Freeman's watching this, ring 000. We will support a surrender plan. That option's open to him, absolutely.
I do appeal for the person responsible to hand themselves in immediately. Your destiny is in your hands.
The 56-year-old is accused of shooting 2 officers dead and injuring a third at his Paul Punker home before escaping into the rugged Victorian high country last Tuesday. And despite a massive search involving more than 400 police officers, aerial support and the ADF, the self-proclaimed sovereign citizen still hasn't been found. Dr. Vincent Hurley is a former police officer, hostage negotiator and current criminologist from Macquarie University. Vincent, welcome to the briefing. We're hearing police appealing to Dezi to surrender himself, but a lot of Australians would be thinking that's pretty unlikely given what we've learnt about him. Why have authorities used this strategy here?
First of all, they're doing that to give him an option, to let him know that he's not boxed in and that there is no alternative available. Given his political ideology as a sovereign citizen, he's very anti-police, anti-government in the first place. So they don't want to run the risk of not it being really obvious. And that's why there's been 2 appeals, one from the commissioner and one from his wife. So they want to make sure, for clarity in his mind, that there are options. Now, generally, there wouldn't be 2, but another reason why there is 2 is because he is being worn down physically and mentally by the elements. So he's out there by himself. He'll have no one to talk to. So again, it is not putting pressure on him, but it's just making sure that he thoroughly understands that there are options and the police are not going to go in and seek revenge, because ultimately the police want to get him to court for the families and for the general community. The police aren't going to do anything that is going to jeopardise that legal process, because they don't want to give him the possibility of an appeal in a couple of years down the track because the police may have done something wrong. So they want to reassure him that he can come out and they won't harm him at all. And they won't, because it's just not the way the negotiators or special operations police operate. They want that person in custody.
You've previously said that things like this, surrender plans, are something that negotiators start drafting almost immediately, in this case, as immediately as he fled into the bushland. Can you talk to us a little bit about what exactly a surrender plan is and in what circumstances they're commonly used? Because a lot of people listening would have heard these in hostage situations, really.
So negotiators generally go to 3 types of incidents. Someone held hostage, someone like Dezi Freeman who's gone in the bush, and generally someone who is wanting to commit self-harm. So a surrender plan will be slightly different for all of them, but for him, the police will want to make sure that, in fact, he wants to surrender. They're also mindful of his ideology and that of his physical and mental state having been out there. So what a surrender plan is, it is if you're talking to a 10-year-old. Now, that's not being condescending. The reason the language that negotiators use is very simplistic, very clear, and very precise is because, generally speaking, the events leading up to a surrender, they are under a lot of immense emotional and psychological pressure. So the negotiator has to make sure that the person receiving the information, in this case Freeman, thoroughly understands what the police are saying. So you would say, for example, we want you to come out with your hands up, do not drop them, and take 5 steps forward. And the negotiator will then say, do you understand that? And he will say yes. And then the negotiators will say, can you repeat that back to me? So that means that I know that he has clarity of mind to be able to do what he does, that he can actually hear what is being said, and there is no misinterpretation by him or by the negotiators on what the process is.
When it comes to finding Dezi Freeman, police have said this is a difficult and challenging search geographically, but also you've said that this is something that could take months. Why is that?
The reason it will take so long is because of the mountainous terrain. It is because it will be very exhausting for the police to be able to cover that amount of ground. There'll be inner perimeter and there'll be an outer perimeter, and they'll have to cover all these different possibilities. Now, because he's armed with long arms or a rifle, the police will have an idea on the power and the calibre and the distance of that particular rifle. So they will want to make sure that they are outside that range of the firearm, but also that if he has a scope on that rifle, he will be using that as a set of binoculars to look for the police. So it's not just the police looking for him. They will be assuming that he will be looking for them. And that could be including booby traps, or if he's a prepper, and I believe that's the case, he might have water, food, clothing, further ammunition and firearms stashed away somewhere. So it is because of the geographic size of the area that it will take so long.
By all accounts given to us by Victoria Police, this is a mammoth search effort. This is something that involves hundreds of police officers. We know that they've also deployed aerial support, and we did get confirmation just earlier this week that there are members of the ADF that are joining these efforts. Can you explain to us how these people and officers and soldiers are being used to help search efforts at the moment? What exactly are they doing on the ground?
Okay, so they will be breaking up the search from north to south or from east to west, or they could be breaking up the search based on 100 or 200 square metres. Now, that might not seem very much, and it's not, but given a thick terrain, it can be exhausting. So they'll search an area, then they'll go back and re-sweep the area to make sure that they haven't missed him or some other type of, might be a clue or discarded clothing or food. What the Army's role in it is a bit secret. They won't disclose that, and you and I can only speculate on that. But many of the police, when I was in for 30 years and as a hostage negotiator, many of the police in the New South Wales equivalent called the Tactical Operations Unit, they are former or currently serving reservists in the ADF. So their bush skills will be equivalent to Freeman, but of course they won't know the geography as well. But with that, it's not to be forgotten that the local police will know the geography just as well as Freeman. So it's not as if he's holding all the cards. The disadvantage to the police is that he has gone off into the bush, and as far as we know at this point in time, they just don't know where he is.
Well, we are talking about tactical advantages and disadvantages. It has come to light that Dezi is in fact a sovereign citizen or identifies as a sovereign citizen. Does that complicate things, or does that make the investigation a little bit easier? Because police were appealing earlier in the week for anyone who was harbouring or assisting him to come forward with information.
It would just be an aspect of it. They would be, and when I say they, the negotiators and the police would be thinking through his mindset. Now, they would already have a good understanding of who he is because of his previous dealings within the courts and with the police. So that won't come as a surprise to them. They'll be thinking about that. They won't know until such time as they actually make contact with him what his frame of mind is. So even though he may be, for want of a better phrase, a fanatical, a right-wing extremist, That doesn't necessarily mean, and I've seen it myself, that over time, in his case being exposed to the cold, because it's been bitterly cold down there, and if he's running out of water and food and lack of sleep, that doesn't mean that he's not pliable to be able to control him to surrender. But they're not going to know that until that time.
Obviously, public safety is paramount in a situation like this. Residents and members of the public have been told to stay inside and keep away from search zones. But we have been hearing that surrounding businesses are starting to feel the economic impacts. I'm curious to know, does that play into police considerations at all, the kind of knock-on effects of something like this occurring?
Absolutely, Chris, absolutely. All the investigations would be focused on him in the bush, which is totally understandable. But there will be the local police who know the local businesses, and the police will be making arrangements for, say, food. They will be briefing the community as much as they can with the information. They're allowed to do that, keeping them up to date. Now, in some respects, the numbers of police there, you would hope, might go a little bit away of supporting the local businesses, because the police need to eat. They'll need things like food, obviously, and water. But it will have a knock-on effect, also a psychological knock-on effect to the town. They'll go through possibly feelings of frustration because they're not getting information from the police. But it's not that the police don't have the information. It's just that they can't release the information because some of the things will be protected. So when he comes out, hopefully when he comes out, is that it doesn't compromise that process, because ultimately, as I said, they want to get into court.
And Vincent, before we let you go very briefly, we did see a placard on the weekend of Dezi's face with the sign underneath reading "Free Man." Does it surprise you that someone like this has become somewhat of a symbol amongst some far-right Australians?
Look, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. The thing about sovereign citizens, unlike other right-wing extremist groups, is that most sovereign citizens, most, not all, but most, stick to themselves insofar as they don't form a cohesive group like, say, other far-right groups, like the neo-Nazis, for example. So the sovereign citizens pretty much stick to themselves individually, and the reason for that is because any hierarchical order or structure in an organisation they don't agree with, because that is the very premise of their belief, is that we do not want to be held to account by the government, a hierarchical structure. Therefore, we as individuals are not going to come together in a hierarchical order. Does that play into the minds of other people who are watching it? That could become sympathetic, yes, but I would suspect that most police around Australia would have a reasonable idea, because of the political ideology of the sovereign citizens, that they already know who they are. But it wouldn't help at all. It just was appalling.
Vince, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us on The Briefing.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Chris. Anytime.
That was Dr. Vincent Hurley, former police officer, hostage negotiator and current criminologist from Macquarie Uni, speaking with me there. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Be sure to send this episode to someone who you think might enjoy it. And while you're there, be sure to leave us a rate and a review. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.